All right, welcome everyone. We are live. Today we're going to be covering the 0.11 release of CDK for Terraform. Welcome everybody. We've got some recurring guests on here that I'm going to have introduce themselves as long as someone new. So to kick stuff up, why don't we go ahead and do introductions? Why don't we just get started with Ansgar here?
The one who can't find the unmute button. Hi, I'm Ansgar. I'm a software engineer on the CDK for Terraform team. And yeah, I'm really excited about the latest release and to show you some of the good parts. So yeah.
I feel like Sarah should go next, and then we'll do Mark for the big last one.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Sarah MacDonald, product manager for CDK for Terraform, and yeah, excited to show off the new release today.
And then Mark.
Hi guys, I'm a new engineering intern on the CDK for Terraform team.
He's also from Ohio, right, which is very close to where I grew up in northern Kentucky. So good to see another East Coaster. Yeah, well, thank you. Thanks for the introduction. So like I said, today we're going to be covering the CDK for Terraform 0.11 release. Before we get too far into it, though, I do need to go over our code of conduct, which is very simple. Just be welcoming, inclusive, friendly, and patient at all times. Be respectful, considerate, professional. Basically, don't be a troll. And if you're confused about that, we have a link right there in that little the banner, so you can go and check that out. Cool. All right, let me remove that there and we'll get to it. So today we've got a number of features we're going to be covering that are coming out in the release. And we're going to discuss through some of them. We've got some demos there, and then I believe at the end maybe we can get a little bit of discussion around the GA release, right, Sarah? The general availability, just maybe a little bit. But in the 0.11 release, I was wondering, Sarah, if you could just sort of, if you wouldn't mind talking about kind of the main things that we're going to be covering today in terms of what was important in that release.
Yeah, so I think if they've tuned in before, they know that we are working hard to get to our GA release. And so a lot of the focus in this release and the following release is really on improving the core user experience for the core workflows and making sure that everything is really solid for those developer workflows to be able to, define and deploy your infrastructure via Terraform in your chosen language. So in this release, there were a few, I guess I would say, highlighted areas that we focused on. One in particular is the workflow for adding providers to use in your application. So for folks who don't know, CDK for Terraform allows you to use any Terraform provider that exists in the Terraform ecosystem. And we will generate the necessary resource classes for you in your chosen language to use that provider in your application. Previously, there were two basic ways to sort of interact with and add providers, and Ansgar is going to talk about a new workflow that streamlines that for users and kind of gets them the best experience for adding a provider to use with their app. So I'm really excited about that feature, and Ansgar is going to do a nice demo of that for us. A few other important improvements. One is a new debug command, and so we're going to talk a little bit about that more in the stream. But I think any developer knows that debugging is just a fact of life, and so we tried to add some new tooling to make that process smoother for folks. Aside from that, I think we're going to talk through some other smaller improvements, as well as some new docs and sort of other kind of quality of life improvements that we made along the way. So yeah, excited to kind of get into those more.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing some of those, especially the provider command. I know that may look and sound a bit small, but how many times do you do that during a project? So it's nice to not have to think about it, right? It's good time saving. So
yeah, it's crucial for that for like your first experience with the product too. Like it's for especially a new application, it can be a stumbling block, and so I think that's where we really wanted to focus some attention on improving that.
Yeah, nice. And before we dig into each of the individual features, Ansgar, I wanted to ask, do you have any higher level thoughts not higher level, but thoughts from a high level on this release? in terms of like, maybe a theme or just your thoughts while you're going through it?
Ooh, that's a tough question. But I'm very excited about the provider ad one, as I said before, and can only repeat. But from an overall perspective, I'm really glad that we also tackled, not we, but even our core contributor, John, tackled the way we handle lists. And that's something that's also coming up. And yeah, if you've seen the previous release, we did a first step there for lists that are computed only, and now we changed this for all lists. And yeah, I could go into detail, but that's something that really is really exciting, because it's like a ground building block for future things that we can add.
Yeah, that's always important, right? To take the time to set up the foundations for these bigger things that we're going to obviously talk about when we get to it. Well, why don't we go ahead and hop into each of these new bits? Because I know in the previous stream we did on the CDK, we had one very big feature, right? The multi-stack deployments, but this time we've got these smaller ones. So why don't we go through small but big ones, right? So let's go ahead and talk through these. So first one is the add command, the provider add command. So a new command for the CLI. And Ansgar, if you're ready, we'll put your screen up here for sharing. And Ansgar is going to walk us through a demo of how this all works. Because, hopefully, are you going to be walking through how like the old way of doing it and then show?
Yeah, for the old way, I would need to share the browser. I could do that later on. But cool. For the new one, the new shiny one, I brought 3 different CDKTF projects that you can see on the left. Simple TypeScript one with O.10, the previous release, as of yesterday when we released O.11, and a project with C#. And if we have a look into it, it's just an empty initialized CDK for Terraform project that comes to life when you run init. So nothing is in there. If you look in the CDKTF JSON, there are no providers in there. And I'm gonna, GraphQL is crashing, nice. I'm gonna show you the provider add command now. So, because this is, as Sarah said, like the first touch point you really have, because if you have an empty CDK for Terraform project and no providers yet, or no bindings, you can't really do anything with it, right? So you can't, you want to provision infrastructure, and usually you would first need to read a bit in the docs or read the output of the help. So this is printed when you initialize it, and it already says you like, okay, do an npm install provider AWS, which is something you can do for a pre-built one, and if it happens to be exactly this one that you want to use. But in my case, I'm going to do CDKTF provider add, which is the new command. And just quick question, is it big enough with the terminal? What you're thinking? Cool.
Yeah, I think it looks good.
Yeah, so that new command takes one or more providers or provider names that I could give to it, optionally with a version. And that's not the version of the pre-built provider package, for example, but it's the version of the actual Terraform provider underneath. So what I could do here is I could do CDKTF provider add AWS add version 3, for example. And so the AWS Terraform provider currently is at major version 4 as of, I think, for a few months or even a bit longer now. But our pre-built provider package is 2, but I know that I want to use the older version. And so I can do this, and it will then do some error. That is
Beautiful.
live coding. What does it say? Oh, the version constraint is in. That's actually right, because my shell swallowed part of it. It swallowed the thing here. So if I type the command correctly, it will tell me that it's trying to figure out whether there's a pre-built provider. And then it will figure out that there is no pre-built provider for CDKTF 0.11 and the older AWS provider version, something that usually would have taken quite some manual effort to figure out. And then it will do what you also can do, which is locally generating the provider bindings. And it does so by adding the AWS provider to the CDK, well, this is broken but unfortunate, but to the CDKTF.json config file, which you can see over here. And there's the 3 that I accidentally created with the non-escaping of my things there. So yeah, it was added to our config, and CDKTF get ran. So in Gen, we are having generated provider bindings for the AWS provider. And if we look at the versions file, it resolved to 3.75.2. So that's like the latest one that you can get with the 3. And so if I reset this file, I don't know, it's ignored now. And if I, for example, wouldn't have added AWS at 3, but rather, and let me quote this before I forget this again, at 4, and this operator allows it to increment the versions, I would get a pre-built provider. So this major version 8, that one changes whenever we release a new CDKTF version. And as the release has just happened yesterday, there are not many to it. So there's like the second one, the pre-built provider. So there were 2 builds, and they happen all the time whenever something is updated. And yeah, it's installing the pre-built provider package that fits for my CDKTF 0.11 project using TypeScript and some AWS provider with this version. And yeah, I'd show you something more. Maybe you have some questions by now, but before I continue.
Yeah, I have a question, just for clarification, Ansgar. So in essence, this command is going to go and it's going to do a couple of things, with the main goal being it adds the provider that you ask it to, in this case, the AWS provider. But in between, it does some extra stuff in the sense that it will check, it goes up and it checks for one that fits your current version of the CDK for Terraform, as well as the provider, and tries to find that match. And if not, goes and finds the most appropriate one, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly
nice,
it.
nice. And we just saw 2 cases where we had tried to get a provider where we did not have a CDK for Terraform provider AWS there. And then this one we just showed where there is a matching one, and it went and fetched that for us.
Yeah, and just to do a comparison, so for example, here I'm having an older CDKTF project using, if I look in the package JSON, CDKTF there, 10.4, 0.10.4, so like the previous version. And if I do CDKTF provider at AWS, and I cannot specify no version, and it will use the latest.
Oh, nice.
If I run this command, it will check for a pre-built provider, and it found actually like the latest one in 0.7, or not 0.7, but in 7.0.68. And yeah, so that's the pre-built provider we are getting for an older CDKTF project. So it will actually make sure that the package works for the bindings.
Oh, nice. Question: Does it handle updating? Like, could you say specify a later version with that thing, and it will just update it in place, or will it try to add to?
That would need a bit more complexity. So that's something we already thought about for the future, and also we thought about listing all of the ones you've installed. That makes it a bit more easy. But so this one is installed in the package JSON. So as the usual, like an npm dependency, it already has this caret here, which allows it to upgrade to versions that don't change like in the major version. So it now would be able to automatically upgrade within ranges of your current CDKTF version that's allowed. But it's not, so the pre-built providers are always having some kind of point-in-time view on the latest version of the AWS provider.
Yeah.
So if you want full control of your CDKTF, the provider you've installed, so I'm going to just resetting this one. You can also do this one. I could do CDKTF, I'll just copy this. And now I will say like, okay, I want version, oh, I hope this exists. I'm just going to go with 4.0.1. I hope there's such a version. And I can do force local. I'm not sure whether that version actually exists as a pre-built one, but I just, let's be adventurous here and hope it still installs the local one. Does not exist. So it's adding the local one right now, and it's failing. Why does it fail? Oh, it does not exist.
Yeah, it doesn't exist.
Yeah, I tried. It was quite adventurous.
Yeah.
But what I could do is I could do not such a version that does not exist, but I could say, well, I want version 4. I hope they have something like this. And I need this. Oops. And oh no, it has a pre-built one. Sorry. I'm gonna showing off this force local flag.
And so what is this gonna do again right here?
That one is now adding the provider locally. So
Okay.
in the CDKTF.json, provider should have appeared. I hope that's just some issue with, no, it isn't.
Looks like it's still doing stuff, but
Oh, that's the wrong project. That's why. I wonder. I knew it would bite me. So here it appeared.
Yeah.
Thanks for asking. Yeah, now it's building the bindings for the AWS provider. It takes a bit, but now it's done. But it, as you asked, this allows it to update the provider whenever there's a newer version. So, for example, if I would run this in a week, now I got 4.15.1, and I might get 4.16. something as soon as there's new version. So this kind of version constraints, and we're having links in the docs and links to the Terraform docs. They do the same. Allows it to increment that last part, so the minor version. Yeah. Very
nice. Very nice.
Yeah.
It also looks like too, since we're keeping track of it in the package.json file, that you run CDK provider add, but if someone else grabs this and pulls it down, they will not have to do this. They'll just have to do an npm install, right?
Yeah, sure. It will all be in the project. So whenever you pull something from Git after committing it, it's all there. So we're not like 2005. What was it when
we sure?
Yeah,
is there still war between Yarn and npm? Is that still happening? I don't even know.
Apparently yes, because we support Yarn and npm for installing the package. So we will detect whatever you're using. So yeah, that's still
beautiful.
There. But yeah, last but not least, I have a C# project and can also do a CDKTF provider and just go with random, because that's the HashiCorp random provider. And I can also add that one, and it will install a pre-built provider using .NET add, which is the command you use for your C# projects. And that one also added it somewhere here to the dependencies. So it's all straight to go. And if there's no pre-built one, it will also fall back to the locally built ones. That is something that's shared among all languages we support. Yeah, so that's the provider add command that I'm really excited about.
Very nice. That is nice. It's yes, and Sarah just pinged me saying we have a very good set of resources here that I'm going to post. Just go straight to the full release. so you can see those notes. I'm just getting these posted across our platforms, which, by the way, if you're tuning in, we are streaming through to Twitch, YouTube, and LinkedIn, so you're going to see some stuff. Like if we start answering random questions, the wall is indeed not asking me a question. It's probably someone from a different platform. So keep that in mind. Yeah, the provider add command, that takes a lot of thought. I mean, every time I go to use one in normal Terraform, I got to embarrassingly go to docs, look at the example, copy, paste it every time. Look at what's the squiggle mean again? Oh, that's the minor version. But this takes some of that cognitive load and some of the friction out of getting started. So it's an awesome addition to the workflow. You know, speaking of the workflow how it is now versus how it was, you know, what were the steps for figuring out a pre-built provider version that was installed previously? And, you know, maybe we can kind of throw Mark into the deep end here, and he can give us some insight there. What do you say, Mark?
And in explaining that, or sorry. So sorry.
Yeah, so I'll just restate the question. Yeah. It's just, so the steps to figure out which pre-built provider version that you may have needed to install previously. Like what happened basically, to my understanding, prior to this command, right? Was that the question that we were trying to get at, Ansgar?
Yeah, so I think I said that earlier. So we could share a browser here and show like all the previous steps. So you already mentioned this. So yeah, you would go to the Terraform registry, and I think I could share my screen here. I think you would need to put on my browser.
Well, while he's pulling that up,
I think you need to edit to make it visible. I already pulled it up. Cool.
Oh yeah. Right.
Sorry. Yeah,
like, what's Ansgar doing? Why is he?
Yeah, I don't have this button that you have, so and you were waiting for me to press it probably. I'm just like, I'm not the host. I'm not allowed to do anything here. I can't take over control. Should I show the almighty previous process kind of?
Yeah. Let's do it. Let's do it.
Yeah. So, and you see, I already have a couple of tabs open to make this happen. So, as Sarah stated earlier, you can use all the 2,129 Terraform providers from the registry with the CDK for Terraform, and if I browse them and I could go the usual route, and I don't know, I'm just gonna go with the Google Cloud Platform for now. And so if I want to add this to CDK for Terraform, and if I want to figure out whether there's a pre-built provider for Google, one thing I can do is I could go to the repository manager. That is something that I know because that's where we have our pre-built providers defined. It's like, oh, that's the technical cheat sheet, and could like, okay, there's Google, but now I'm still like, okay, there's Google. And what we do is we generate GitHub repositories for all of them. So whoever's interested in some GitHub generation magic that's also using Terraform under the hood, look at that repository. But that's quite complicated and not useful. But I could do CDKTF provider, and here's the pre-built one. So here's the Google one. And now I have the install instructions here. So I could go CDKTF provider Google. But yeah, now I don't know which version this is. So if I need a specific version, as of recently, in the source directory with all the resources, where is it? There's a version JSON that tells me which version this latest one is. So I could pull that one up and figure out, okay, that's Google provider version 4.2022, and say like, okay, the latest version is good enough for me, and then go ahead and install that one. If that's not the case, I would need to add it to the CDKTF JSON file that we saw prior to that. So I could do put in there Google, add, and then type a version constraint. And that is something that's mentioned in our docs, how that works. So I might need to pull up the docs as well. And yeah, that's all this kind of dance you need to do to install pre-built providers and to figure out whether they exist yet. So we're having some plans, of course, to adding more and more to that. Currently, it's as a by request basis. So whenever some pre-built providers need it, we will add it to this list, and everything will be generated. But we can't just drop like 2,000 providers in there, because then I think at least GitHub Action usage would go through the roof. That is, so there's certain danger to it. But yeah, this is like a very long story. I made short. There are multiple ways. They could also involve Googling and looking into the docs or into examples to figure out what you did last time. And yeah, it has been quite a quite a work there, quite some bit.
Yeah, so I think you can see from this why we're so excited about the provider add command. It should kind of reduce the need for all of this like browser hopping, and to Ansgar's point, once we get further down the line with figuring out how to scale up our process for providing pre-built packages, also users won't have to like watch that list. They won't have to keep track. Like when you use the provider add command, it just checks for you. And if there is a pre-built package, which I guess we haven't really mentioned yet, I mean, it's not a bad thing to generate the bindings locally. It just usually takes a bit more time. So the pre-built providers are sort of a convenience, a convenience there. So now that we have this great provider add command, as we kind of work on scaling up the number of pre-built packages we can offer users, you won't have to worry about figuring that out for yourself. The tool will check for you and just install the best option that's available. So yeah, thanks Ansgar for showing us all that like sort of tab hopping you had to do. I think it just illustrates why this add command is so helpful. I did want to mention that this does not replace the get command. So the get command is still available. It's still needed when you are adding modules to your project. So get is still the right path to use for adding modules and generating those resource classes or bindings that you need for your app. And of course, you can still opt to use get if you'd like. This is just a new workflow to kind of add some of that, do some of, like you said, Cole, the cognitive lift for you to figure out what you should use.
Yeah, it's something I did not show, but mentioned briefly is you can type multiple providers. So I could go here and I could do, okay, this is couldn't type. This is a new project now, and I want to do CDKTF provider add, and I'm gonna use AWS, Google, because multi-cloud, now random, and should we use some nice providers that we could use? We probably use Kreutzworker / Docker as well. So this is how you enter namespaces. You could also enter private registry name, works with that one as well. And yeah, so this would now do the whole process for five providers. So more space for failure. So hopefully it works, but should work. And it's even faster, so you don't have to do it multiple times.
Beautiful. It does. It's a lot of time savings, and I appreciate you walking through the command. That sometimes that's enough to just sort of stop you, right? It's 30 minutes gone. Sometimes you just stare. You're like, well, I could start this project, or I could get lost in a rabbit hole. But yeah, that is a very convenient, stringing together all the providers being added, not having to worry about any of those. Especially, I feel like the weight of what this is shows, as Sarah pointed out when you started tab hopping. Yeah, so in between here, and by the way, Ansgar, you looked like did you still have some stuff to cover there on that command?
I just showed that they all appeared in the package JSON. So we got 5 new pre-built providers installed. Beautiful. So it's just like some background, some B-roll. So for folks looking at the code and what happened.
Yeah, Nice. Did have a question from the chat that I wanted to field to y'all, and it also made me realize that perhaps for those tuning in who aren't completely aware of everything that's going on here, right? The CDK for Terraform in general is going to let you build infrastructure through Terraform with a programming language, one of the ones we support, which someone asked, and I went ahead and posted those in there: TypeScript, Python, Java, C#, and experimental Go support. But that always does bring up the question for people who are just getting in this, which I'll just put right here on screen: limitations or features missing while creating crowd infrastructure by this approach in comparison with the same created via HCL, which I assume just means through vanilla Terraform. And Ansgar and Sarah, you all get that question so frequently, so you all are masters of answering. So I will let you answer.
Yeah, I'll start, and then if Ansgar, if you want to kind of follow on. So I think that you definitely will encounter some things that feel different. I think there is, definitely a different sort of feel to using a programming language. Especially if you're very used to working with HCL. Currently, there are a few gaps between sort of what you can do with CDKTF and what you can do in HCL in terms of specific commands. And so that's actually what's up next for us in 0.12. Leading up to our GA release is focusing on a few of those sort of missing functionality between, and a lot of it is kind of working through the particularities of programming languages that we're supporting and trying to map that to things that you can do with HCL. So I'll actually turn it over to Ansgar if there's any in particular you want to talk about that we're going to be tackling in 0.12.
Yeah, for 0.12, I think that's mainly around iterations. That was something I mentioned, what I'm excited about, why I'm excited about this small, appearingly small change that we did, how lists are handled. And yeah, iterations in Terraform or in HCL, and you would use stuff like count, and I think it's called for each or each. Each is in the iterator kind of. And you would use these things if you want to iterate over things at runtime. And yeah, in CDKTF, you can use escape hooks. What we are doing under the hood is we are generating JSON configuration that is like the equivalent to what you would write in HCL. It's just more machine readable and writable, but it has the same features that you could use in HCL. So what you could do is you could use those overrides to define those blocks for count and each, and those would then appear in the output, and they would work like they would in Terraform. So the output that we generate, you could use that and run Terraform apply on that file, and yeah, it would still work. And that's what our CLI does. So we are doing no real heavy lifting there. And one thing that's kind of like a side effect of this is you can also generate Terraform modules using CDKTF. So you could use that output as a Terraform module. And that is something where we're having some prototypes on at the moment. So our team member Daniel built something recently, and that's something we also hope to include in the future in the CDKTF itself. And so that said, there are rough edges where you would need to resort to escape hooks or escape hatches, and those are the ones that Sarah mentioned that we are going to be working on to make that yeah, more nice to work with. And for the other things, so for providers, for example, as you've seen previously, we're using the existing Terraform providers under the hood. So there's nothing from a resource perspective you can't do. So if there's a provider for it, you can generate the bindings and then you can use it. It's more on the language level if you have quite complicated constructs or expressions. Although we also support Terraform functions, so you can use them as well. So Yeah, maybe that's. I think it depends on the specifics there, what you have in mind. If there's anything quite advanced, but for most parts, there shouldn't be big limitations.
Nice. So, and just for kind of my own clarification, summary, and for anyone else, for this answer, we've not hit GA with CDK for Terraform yet. So of course there are still things that are coming, but at any given time under the hood, it is still calling out to Terraform. It's reaching out across to Terraform, and therefore you can use the escape hatch function and do whatever it is that you need to, or turn it, or use the synth command and then work with it as a Terraform project. So I would say there's, if you know, not so much limitations as opposed to just right now you got to do it through normal Terraform. But as we just saw with the provider add command, it just gets better and better. And on that note, there's an event, CDK Day, going on tomorrow, where we're actually going to have a talk about this exact topic. So kind of a great bridge into that. I'm going to post that link in the chat here for everyone to see, so you can go and check that out if you have more curiosities on that. Okay. So just for time comparison, why don't we move on to the next big piece of 0.11, which is going to be the debug command. So I'm going to go ahead and put your screen on. Where did it go? Oh, here it is. Put your screen on there, Ansgar, and we can go and talk about the debug command and see what's up there.
Yeah. So if I do CDKTF debug, it's a little while, but it will print all the different versions and system configuration that's underneath the project here. So for this example, I'm having the O.10 project, so I can see CDKTF O.10.4, and the CLI I'm using is O.11, and also it shows the constructs package and the Terraform version. I think I have a more recent one, but okay, that's something I could investigate. But yeah, so that's what it's doing at the moment.
Nice. So nice. Yeah, okay. Our conversation earlier makes sense. So convenience command to grab some quick values, otherwise you're gonna have to go through. And by the way, chat, if you at any point in time have any questions, again, if they're on topic here, great. If they're not, if they're just about the CDK, please feel free to ask. And of course, Mark and Sarah, if you have anything, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could explain a little bit why which exact versions are important to know.
Yeah, so one thing is, for example, for us, it's quite important. With the experience of working on this tool, we can spot things pretty quick. So if there's a user, I can't just go ahead and ask them on GitHub, which version of all these kind of tools are you on? So that's a utility that will help us to gather a bit more feedback. And that's also where we might extend this into. So it could carry more context about the project at hand, so that it's giving some better oversight. And for example, for versions, in this project, I'm using currently Node.js version 14. We're having some checks in the CLI that's checking for a minimum version, but not for an upper version. And yeah, there have been cases where a weird version produced some other outputs because behavior changed. And that's also something that allows us to spot this kind of system configuration. And for example, one thing that's a common issue is if you have a CDKTF CLI in a different version than your CDKTF project, and you generate provider bindings using the newer CLI, so the newer generator for provider bindings, and an older CDKTF base library, they might not work together. So forget we actually check this. So under the hood, we're using the same logic and doing some comparison and throwing in errors. So CDKTF provider add works with pre-built providers here. But if I end up using one that's locally built, just go with AWS at something with 2. That will probably fail as soon as we start to run the get, because it will tell me, oh, you're using an older CLI and newer CLI in an older library. So what you commonly could do is you could use an older CLI version and run that and use that to run get. And yeah, that's something where these kind of versions are important.
That makes perfect sense, because in a world of npm package soup, getting the correct package is very, very important, depending upon how much you value your time. And I'm glad to see these guardrails dropped in here and other things to make sure that the guardrails are there. This debug command showing to be very useful. Nice. Do we have any other questions on this command or anything, comments, thoughts? Sarah, perhaps?
I guess I would just add, this is all linked from that blog post that we'll share here, but we did add also a debugging page to our docs with some more information about, beyond just the debug command, kind of how to turn on logs and like other kind of tips and tools for debugging. So yeah, just some new docs that are available there as well to hopefully help people through this.
Very nice, very nice. Those are all in that post that I just put up. Let me just highlight it again. It's up here. That's probably not the most convenient thing to click on if you are a viewer. So I will drop it back in the chat again real quick. Copy a link. Here we go. Just for your convenience. Okay, nice. So debug command, that takes us up to some underlying changes that are going on, and that's some changes to lists. Now, y'all went over this briefly when we talked about it, but in essence, these are under the hood changes, right? That are going to prepare us for later stuff. So perhaps Sarah, you could walk us into the thoughts around this. Oh, should I show that yet, Ansgar?
Well, that would be me talking about them, but and it's on purpose, Oda 10. But Sarah could go first, and then I can show what's changing. So the interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll keep this brief and just let Ansgar dig into it. But I think one thing that is interesting about CDKTF as a tool is that we have to make sure that all these resources that we're generating from Terraform providers and modules are usable and accessible across these 5 programming languages. And so, as folks probably know, different programming languages deal with certain concepts differently. In particular, arrays and lists have been kind of a, I would say, slightly sticky problem to kind of solve across all the languages and have all those resources be accessible. So that's like the meta thing that we've been working on, and made some improvements to this actually over the last several releases. We've been sort of chipping away at this issue with lists. And so Ansgar is going to talk about the most recent chapter in our dance with lists.
Nice.
Would you like me to share your screen now?
Yeah, you may.
Okay.
And, yeah, so it feels like a big builder, but it's now like, oh, there's not much that changed. So this is from ODA 10, where this changed for computed lists. So lists where the data in them is only available at runtime. So for example, if you use a data source in Terraform, all the data in there is computed, or that's how it's called on the schema level at least. So that's our wording when talking about it. It's like the read-only data where you can't put a value on. And so I'm using that blog post or that upgrade guide with the examples in there, because that's the same now for any list. So where you previously would write the name of your list, could be some endpoints or list attribute is the example here. You would call a method with the name of that list and pass it an index, formatted as a number even, as a string even. And yeah, we fixed that up, and now you do call, or you can retrieve the list attribute. And this now enables you to also get like the whole list if you want to use it, or the whole item. And the list attribute has a .get function, as we already can see. So I kind of feel like I'm talking in circles, but that takes an index if you have one and returns an item like shown here. But you can also use the whole list, and this is what where we're thinking about how we might do iteration. So if you would have a list and you want to do something for each item in there, so which is in Terraform if you use for each, and we're planning on some kind of interface that can sit on top of such a list. And that was previously not possible because you would always get at least an item. And now you can also use like the whole list and pass it into an output, for example, if you want to use that somewhere else. And yeah, that's like the seemingly small change that has this kind of effect to it. And also this change is in our upgrade guide for 0.11, which we haven't talked about, also happened for maps. So you can do similar things with maps too. So if you have like an object thing. But yeah, so that's what you can see here, like how you could work with tags. And yeah, that's specific of the upgrade guide. That's also linked on our changelog and everywhere else. And it's out now.
So just for my clarification, so it looks like this is kind of two parts, right? The first part being when working with lists, arrays, whatever you're going to call them in your particular language, this is going to bring working to them closer to how you would work with them in the language itself, versus having to kind of do a very special case, right, to deal with it through the CDK for Terraform. And it's also going to set up for hooking in and operating with lists like we're used to in normal Terraform. So for each and count in the future.
Yeah.
Sweet. Cool. All right, cool. Well, that is excellent to hear, because, you know, once you get deep into IAC, you know, you're just throwing lists and counts all over the place. Well, hopefully not too much all over the place. But did we have any other questions around this upcoming change, comments, or thoughts?
I saw one question in the chat that asked about Python support.
Oh yeah,
I read that right. And yeah, we do support Python. And not since recently. I don't know if it was the first language we shipped, because I was not there yet for the very first versions of the CDKTF. But as long as I am with the team, we had support for Python. So that is out now. No, it has been out.
Nice. Yeah. So, Mark, did you have any questions for about or thoughts on this feature? The work on lists.
Yeah. So I'm kind of curious, like what like added functionality lists will introduce compared to, like, you know, simple for loops.
Yeah. I could show my screen. So the other one, the code for that, I think that helps a bit. So I think that visualizes it a bit more. So in CDKTF, as we're using a high level language, you're right, we could just do for, and I can't even type for loop anymore. Oh, thanks. And that's at least the start. So I could do for loop and do like few items and create a Terraform output, for example, for each of them. So I could create multiple outputs, and the value could be the number. So now I would have a loop that creates Terraform outputs. And or of course, in real life with a provider, you could create multiple EC2 instances or things like that, multiple Lambda functions, whatever you need. And well, this can be used for anything where you know beforehand what you need. And now the question is, what is beforehand? So the CDK for Terraform has like a two-step process. So the first one is called synthesizing. This is where we take your code, run it, and produce the Terraform config. And for everything that you know at this stage, you could use, for example, environment variables that carry all the count of servers you need. And then the synthesized result would already contain those 10 servers. But as I said earlier, like with the computed lists, that's stuff that's only available when Terraform runs, so later in the process. And that is something where you need to use constructs like the for each in Terraform, where we don't have native support yet, which is the thing we're working on. And for another example would be if you have a separate workspace and there's an output with like, it has a list of all the users at your company, and then you want to have another Terraform project and you want to create like, I don't know, some GitHub account for your users. I think some companies might do that. And then you could, or invitations to the company GitHub org. And then you could use a remote state data source and get that kind of list, and then do like the for each in what you would do in HCL. And that is something that is not possible with the plain for loop, because that has to happen at runtime. And this kind of thinking at what is synthesizing, what is the runtime part, is also covered in our new debug docs. So the debugging page has some better explanation than I could put it into words. So there's some descriptive process of where things could be failing even. And yeah, so I think that page also helps a lot. And yeah, the future of iterators would make this a bit more clear, because if I now would do put the output in some variable and then do o.add override and write each or for each, I don't even remember, and then I have to kind of put in whatever Terraform I would need to do in Terraform. So that's yeah, quite hard. I would need to look that up, and you would also need to know what this looks like in HCL, which is something where the value of CDKTF comes into play, that you don't have to context switch, but you can stay in the language you're using all day for example, for writing applications. So yeah, that's I hope that made it a bit more clear while still being quite complicated and me talking.
No, it definitely did. Thank you.
So let me ask, just because now I'm just curious, Ansgar. So it seems like from that, with respect to iteration through lists right now, the CDK for Terraform, right now, one of the things on the roadmap is paving the way to bring this into the language itself, as opposed to having to use this output and hooking into Terraform during when Terraform is actually not synthesizing, but running and applying and leaving it up to there, but allowing it to happen in this stage, correct?
Yeah, although this output is just something I used as an example for a resource. So you don't have to actually use an output for looping, but you would have to use overrides.
Right. Cool.
Yeah.
Very nice. Okay. Great question, Mark. Are there any other thoughts around this? Ansgar, Sarah, or Mark? Going once, going twice.
No.
All right. So with respect to the remainder of the 0.11 release, so we've got the new provider add command, the debug command. These changes for lists are going to pave the way for bringing count and for each into CDK for Terraform in a much more workflow pleasant manner. What other changes do we have in here? We have some improvements to documentation as well, and some other things. Sarah, you kind of touched on those in passing. Were there any other areas in that we wanted to cover?
The only other thing I'd mention, in addition to the new debugging docs page, we also have a new best practices page, which I'm sure will continue to evolve and grow, but currently includes some helpful best practices to consider when you're getting to more of a production ready type application. And so again, that's all linked in that blog post that we shared already, but would encourage people to check that out. We're always trying to improve the docs too. So if folks have feedback or information that they feel is missing, please do share that with us, either in the Discuss forum or even by opening an issue. That's a big part of getting ready for GA, is making sure that our docs are really comprehensive. So I think both of those new pages are a great addition in this release. So would encourage folks to check those out. I think we've already kind of touched on everything else. So
cool. Then I'm gonna ask the fun question for y'all. So the GA release, right? We're getting closer. So what can you tell us about it, Sarah and Ansgar and Mark?
Well, I think I can, so I can tell you that I think probably folks who have been like watching these types of office hours or paying attention to the project, you've probably noticed that we've been investing a lot of time over the last few releases in like usability improvements and like hardening existing workflows. So I think as we get closer to GA, that's what you'll continue to see, is just a real focus on that core workflow for, planning, applying your cloud infrastructure through your development workflow. So that's really going to remain the focus. We're going to be thinking a lot about closing some of those parity gaps with HCL that we mentioned earlier, as well as doing some work on our convert command to make it easier for people to reference our registry documentation, convert HCL examples over into their programming language of choice, and kind of focusing on even outside of the actual code base, also focusing on curating some more production use cases, some more example projects. That's actually something that Mark's going to be working on during his internship with us. I don't know if you want to say anything. I'm putting you on the spot, Mark, but say anything about any of the example projects that you're planning to focus on.
That'd be really cool.
Yeah, sure. So right now we're looking to have demos for all the supported languages, but also all the supported providers. So you could have resources to kind of reference best practices and all the languages and with all the different providers.
Yeah, so Mark brings a different skill set to our team, which is great because we're a real. People probably notice this from looking at some of our examples. We tend to have more examples in TypeScript, and we have more experience with TypeScript on the team. And Mark, what are some of the languages that you are kind of more of your primary languages that you're looking to dig in with?
Yeah, so I've mostly worked in Java and Python. So, those are going to go a little bit quicker in terms of the demos. I also want to do a demo in C# and Go. So those are going to be a little bit new, but it should be a fun time learning some of that new stuff.
Great. Yeah, it's really cool. He's kind of rounding out our skill set for the summer. So awesome. But yeah, I think that's a big part of us getting to GA as well. It's like there's the areas of focus in the code base, which we've talked a bit about, but then it's also making sure that we have like examples and really thorough docs and best practices and things for people as well. So I think between those two areas of focus, that's what we're going to be working on, pushing on towards the summer.
Summer, GA summer. I don't know. This sounds good. I'm excited. And I like the thought too. I like the thought of hardening the current workflow to be something you can use in production as opposed to just cramming in 3 or 4 new rock star features that may or may not, carry through. So I love that. Nice. Ansgar, did you have any words on the really big milestone that I got asked about at reInvent? I don't know how many times. When are you releasing the GA feature? Soon.
Question sounds familiar. Yeah. Yeah, I'm excited for the iteration part because it's also technically interesting to solve that because we technically can't support taking the for loop that exists and converting this all to Terraform, because in the end we would kind of need to write some kind of bridge that tries to magically understand what the user is supposed to happen, and then put that into declarative language. But on the other hand, we're having this nice opportunity to be able to offer some APIs or ways of working with lists that can be translated into declarative language. And that's also providing some safeguards in the end. So as with Terraform, with CDKTF, you also can do a plan before you apply, so you know what's going to happen. And that is something which I see as a nice upside to that. Because not like you're running your code and everyone knows there's at least one bug in there at the given time, and you're like at God's hands when it runs. So that's the main thing I'm really excited about. But
Yeah, that I'm excited to see how that plays out. I'm excited to hear about the engineering work of playing the game between juggling an imperative approach, translating to declarative, which is interesting. All right, well, I think we've covered the majority of this stuff. I did want to ask sort of a fun question for Mark. You know, you're coming into the internship very, I'm assuming, heavy into the computer science programming space, probably making applications as opposed to infrastructure. I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on seeing this world of like, well, we could write a program, or we could write a program that writes the infrastructure? Like, what's been your thoughts on this experience so far?
I definitely appreciate like the familiarity of working within like the CDK platform. And just first getting here and starting to learn Terraform, like HCL was, not too difficult to learn, but at the same time, in terms of just like, other types of work that you'd be doing alongside of, infrastructure work, it kind of avoids too many like cognitive switches of, having to work, in whatever stack that you're making your main application in, and then having to transition to like HCL, which is just kind of like a little bit different. So being able to use a familiar language and provisioning your infrastructure definitely helps a lot for sure.
Well, looks like y'all are doing something right, Sarah, right? Because that is a very common case we hear, wanting to stay in that language. So we've got proof, which is good. Right, awesome. Well, so that's been the 0.11 release. New provider add command, new debug command. We've got under the hood changes for lists for the future, right? For both the GA release and making it so we can bring for each and count in. Got some improvements to the docs and some improvements and fixes in general that are in that blog post that have been posted to the chat, but I'll also make sure it is set in the description under the video's description when it's posted to YouTube later. Also, random quick apologies to anyone on mobile for Firefox. Apparently, some of the links keep flashing. Hopefully, the interwebs will fix themselves. There doesn't seem to be any remaining question and answer. Were there any other questions, thoughts, or curiosities from the team here, Sarah, Ansgar, or Mark?
I guess I would just make one more plug for the people watching. If you're interested in learning more about CDKs in general, there are other cloud development kits for Kubernetes as well as for AWS specifically, and for Terraform. There is this free community event that's happening tomorrow virtually, CDK Day. It's just cdkday.com. And you'll see a couple of talks there on the Terraform CDK, a few talks from our engineers as well as community members. So if you're interested in learning more, I would just say check that out. I think if you can't make it tomorrow, they do also post those videos to YouTube. So if you register, you'll just get a reminder to watch those when you have time. But should be some really good talks happening tomorrow, I think.
Yeah, and I'm also happen to be wearing the CDK Day sweater from last year. But my camera setup or the angle was not right to have that silently flagging for CDK Day on the screen all the time. But
that's perfect. We should have propped you up more so that we could have seen it throughout the whole thing. Nice. Okay, well, thank you everyone for stopping by. If you are just now getting into the CDK for Terraform, please check out our Learn guides. We have a lot of them. I'm going to go ahead and post them into chat here so everyone can see those and head over and check that out if you're getting into learning it. We also have the documentation that I'm also going to just drop here in the chat. Just going to overwhelm the interwebs with links.
Flashing links.
And then also,
sorry.
Go ahead.
So sorry for the flashing links on Firefox in advance.
Yeah, right. Yeah, hopefully that I don't know why that's a thing. And then also the CDK Day event that's going on tomorrow that I posted earlier in the chat there. Please do check it out. And if you have any questions at all, if you have any curiosities, there's a lot of places you can reach out to us. Obviously, we are on LinkedIn, on Twitter, anywhere. Just reach out, DM us, and we'll get back to you. There's also the GitHub repository as well, which I should grab the link for that really quick, which I will put under the you post that in, which you can leave us an issue there for both discussion, but preferably if there's an actual issue as well. So please be sure to reach out. All the feedback is helpful all the time. We love to hear any of your thoughts that you might have. And I believe that is it until our next release. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for stopping by. And thank you, Mark, Sarah, and Ansgar.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks.
Thank you.